than it seems. So I will invite the Mayor to take the chair for item 8.
Through the now vacated chair, there is some formality around this. I'll just need to formalise this and please ask for nominations for a chair. I'm sorry.
I better not take it.
Second.
We have a nominator, a seconder. Thank you. Just on voices, all in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary carried. Thank you.
Now legitimately in this position. Thank you, Megan. So the paper relates to the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund, and it's a fund, I just got to say this is a preface to it before we all get excited about the $1 billion that's in the contestable fund. This is to cover the whole of New Zealand and is eligible for applications from all councils, developers and mana whenua. So we don't know exactly what will be coming to Auckland, but if we got 200 or 300, we'd be exceptionally pleased. But nevertheless, we need to put applications in. And if we work on the basis of the shovel-ready projects, we put in 73, and then the government chose which ones they wanted out of that. It might be better to put a narrower list in so we have greater control over what might be accepted by the government. But the very first thing I have to do is welcome both Jacques and Fiona to the end of the table. And we need to move this. I'll move it. Do I have a seconder for the item? Councillor Simpson. So it's been moved and seconded, and I'll now invite Fiona to introduce the item. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, through the chair. Today, and thank you for the introduction as well. I've just got some few slides to take you through so you've got an idea of the context. If you am I moving this slide? Thank you. Yes, please. So the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund that we're talking about today is part of the 3.8 billion Housing Acceleration Fund that was announced by the Crown a couple of months ago. Of that 3.8 billion, approximately 350 million is allocated for Maori development, approximately $1 billion for the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund, and that's a contestable fund that the Mayor just introduced for you. And the remainder is set aside for the large-scale projects to support the infrastructure required for the Kaianga Ora housing developments. That includes Mount Roskill, Tamaki, Northcote, Oronga, Mangere, and also Porirua in Wellington. So the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund is for everywhere else except for those large-scale project areas, and we are working with MHUD and the Kaianga Ora right now in how we get as much as we possibly can from the Housing Acceleration Fund in this region. Before I move to the next slide, I would just like to say that this fund, the qualifying infrastructure, is for transport and 3 waters only, so it excludes parks and community facilities. And as the Mayor said, it is nationwide. So I just told you about the 1 billion. We, as a growth council, have been categorised in the criteria as a Tier 1 council, which means that we can't apply for individual projects such as the shovel-ready process we went through. We need to apply for a programme of projects that collectively bring forward or create new housing and significantly bring forward. The applications must enable a minimum of 200 dwellings and require the support of the developers or landowners that we are proposing. We receive those funds where that infrastructure affects it. There are a number of criteria. It's fairly complicated, complex, and there's a large amount of information that we need to prepare against that criteria. The report outlines in detail, but some of it is the 200 plus dwellings, identify the proportion of lower cost houses expected in each of those programs we propose through an expression of interest, demonstrate the area has unmet demand or supports intensification, If there is an area where there is Maori-owned land being developed, then that's also a criteria that they will be assessing. Environmental sustainability, and we have to demonstrate that we've tried all other investment opportunities from elsewhere. That it also mentions, and there's one thing that I'll mention here, the Infrastructure Funding and Financing Act. I came to the Finance and Performance Committee last month and said that we're working with Treasury. The timing of this application and the timing of our ability for that means that we won't have exhausted the infrastructure funding and financing criteria for this. There is also some co-funding principles. The co-funding principles mean that the amount of funds that we're applying for that programme of projects needs to utilise all the traditional means of alternative funding that we receive, i.e. developer mitigation or developer contributions, or in the event that some of the projects in the areas that we are proposing aren't in our development contribution policy, the developer to agree to pay the equivalent of those development contributions to enable that to occur. Thank you. Next slide. So the proposed approach, given the timing that we have, and we're having to involve 3 CCOs, come up with a strategy that hopefully is satisfactory to this committee, is to use our long-term plan RLTP focus areas, and try and use this funding application to reduce some of the gaps that we have in some of those focus areas for the infrastructure and bring forward some of that housing in those areas as a result of that. We have also got some council assessment criteria. If you recall, when we did the shovel-ready process, we set some specific criteria. We have worked with the chair of the planning committee to set some council criteria that we will assess each area against, and they're the 4 bullet points there, and were the appendices to the report. Apologies in advance for the scale of this, but I will just talk through a little bit. The map on the left-hand side is the joint work programme areas for Crown and Council. The light blue areas are where there's joint priority areas between Crown and Council, and the dark blue areas are where we're developing in this first decade within them. The striped areas are where there's live zone and it is council a priority, such as the Northwest Red Hills there. The purple area is the Unitec Carrington Road site, which is a Crown only priority area. And the other council priority areas at the top in those squares are Silverdale, Warkworth and Pukekohe. On the right-hand side, we have the 6 proposed areas where we are asking you to support us investigating expression of interest applications for this fund. That being Red Hills in the live zone areas, Whenuapai to support Plan Change 5, the CRLL Mount Eden Station, the infrastructure required to support the overstation development there. Carrington Road Residential, which is you may know as the Unitec campus. They received some shovel-ready funding, but there are a couple of projects there that would enable them to go if we were successful there. Drury East and Drury West, and we've separated those applications so to give us the best chance, because each side has different criteria and different things to consider in that application, and strengths and weaknesses. This is the written version of what I've just talked through, and you'll see I've listed currently the projects that we've been working with: transport, stormwater and water care, to ascertain how many projects that we have ready that we believe meet the EOI, expression of interest criteria, for this fund in these project areas. We've already got some investment through ATAP, through Shovel Ready and through previous funds such as the Housing Infrastructure Fund in some of these areas, and we are required to demonstrate what council is providing in each of those areas and what previous funding we have to support and ensure that housing is delivered in each of those. There are a number of risks that I wanted to bring to the table for you. The first is it looks as we won't see the detail until the request for proposal and the invite to request for proposal is out later this year on the contractual agreements. However, the expression of interest seems to be the similar risk profile as the shovel-ready agreements that we entered into with Crown Infrastructure Partners, which means that council takes on the risk for any additional dollars or any cost change for projects that we are successful with. As a result of that, there is a potential, if there are funding shortfalls, we are asking for money earlier on in the process, a development process. Generally, it scales up through the life of the project with the more information that you have, which we may have to then, if we continue with and are successful with this fund, potentially reprioritise those funding shortfalls, which may affect other areas that we've chosen to invest in, so that's a consideration. Because it's transport and three waters only, council parks and community facility investment assumptions through our LTP, there may need to be some changing in the timing of that. I'm hoping to have information for the delegated decision makers on what that might look like. So we need to be cognizant of, yes, it's great that there's another bucket of grant money, but we need to be cognizant of the enterprise effects of that on our planned investment strategy. Nearly there. Here is the indicative timelines. The 18th of August is when we've got to submit the EOIs for those areas. Not a lot of time left and a lot of work left to do from minimal staff. The other timelines below that line are estimated from conversations and intonations in the expression of interest. What you need to know is it's a two-step stage. Submitting this EOI just gives us the opportunity to present an RFP later in the year when we've got more information on these projects. So there's a gateway if there are any significant issues that arise through that time period, through those investigations. And if we are successful with an RFP and we do continue through that process, the likelihood of having agreements in place and access to those funds is likely to be the last quarter of next year. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Fiona. Can I just start off the questions? And it's really around the risk of cost escalation or the failure of other parties to do co-funding. That could be a reasonably significant risk that we have not made provision for in our budget, which means that we'd be taking it out of other programs that we had already decided were priorities. So my question is really around how we might mitigate that risk. And just a test, I mean, I presume that we put in the funding bid of what it will cost to deliver that project, and as part of that bid we would have some contingency built into that for unanticipated rises in costs. Is that correct? Can we sufficiently mitigate to lower that risk to our other programs should it come to pass?
So there would be two, yes, thank you through the Chair. There would be two mitigations that immediately spring to mind. The first is, as you just described, we have to declare the amount of the contingency, and that has to be accepted as part of the proposal. The second is we had limited ability to negotiate the terms of the agreement with Shovel Ready, but it's being managed by Kaingora rather than Crown Infrastructure Partners, and we may be able to mitigate some of that risk through that negotiation if we're successful with our RFPs.
Thank you, and I presume that the cost estimation would be on a P90 basis to keep that risk down.
We will do our best to make sure we mitigate council's risks. There's going to be a number of, because we have to present a programme for each of these areas, there will be different projects at different stages, so some might have more certainty than others, but yes, where we don't have that certainty, we'll be asking them to be generous.
Thank you very much. I've got quite a long list of questioners here, so we start with Councillor Walker.
Sure. So, a few questions. Obviously, you've got a short list up there. I'm assuming that this needs to be a collaborative process with the landowners, developers.
Correct.
In that case, are we going to be communicating with landowners and developers, making them aware, and questionable how much we can assist them, but facilitating that process?
So there has been a number of developers. Kayanga Ora has given us as the contact for developers. There's been a number of developers that have come with either some with non-compliant, some with compliant applications. We have enough information together now to be able to contact the developers should this be accepted today as these areas, and ask them for their input and for their written support. It was a request that we involve the developers and try and obtain written support for that area. The difference between this is fund and the shovel-ready fund is that there are two types of agreements. There will be the agreement between us and Crown for the grant, and then there is another proposed agreement, and I'm not quite sure whether it's just with Crown and the developers or with Crown developers and council to enable the housings to substantively be delivered by 2029. So the developers in this case are going to have to say, I am prepared of the 1,000 units in that area that are enabled through this infrastructure. In my land holdings, I am prepared to deliver X amount within that time period. So that's kind of groundbreaking and will involve the developers through the RFP stage in detail. At the moment, with the amount of time we were given and the amount of detail we've got to put together, the best we can do is notify them, advise, give and share with them as much as we possibly can if we don't put in one of these, the information we have in those areas for them to do their own application. As the Mayor, the Chair said earlier, anybody can apply.
But the other question I've got just goes to evaluation. Is there going to be any kind of benefit cost assessment? That is, I mean, let's say you've got a development that delivers on a whole lot and it's very economical in terms of the actual cost. Will that be part of the assessment?
It's part of the EOI application form. It's quite an extensive information required. They ask for yield and they want to know best bang for buck for the Crown dollars that are being spent in that area. So yes, the EOI application has asked for the base level of information. I would expect at the request for proposal stage later in the year, they will be looking much more intensively at that. They also reserve the right to work with us or on the EOI applications if they need further information. So they're doing their very best to give us the best opportunity to make a good application.
And the last question I've got is similar. Will there be some assessment around risk? Because obviously council is going to be concerned about that. There may be some proposals that are more risky, some that are significantly less risky.
So yes, we will have to do that. It's whether it's at the EOI stage or at the request for proposal stage, but we've been having discussions with senior staff around the risks.
If we carry the risk, you can be assured that that will be quite prominent in the list of considerations from our side. Councillor Angela Dalton.
Thank you. You asked my questions, Your Worship, so I'll follow up. Information around the projects that might need to be reprioritised or additional capex that might be required. We won't get oversight of that until the decision's in March next year, late March next year, will we? But that's when they're approved. So once you know what's approved.
Through the Chair, can I clarify what I think you've just asked me? Are you asking me around the community facilities and parks that may need to be reprioritised investments?
Any projects that might need to be either deferred or any additional capex we may need because other partners aren't coming to the table.
Okay, so with parks and community facilities, we've asked them to do a high-level assessment so that the delegated parties will be aware of that. Hopefully, we'll have that information before we submit the EOIs. But in answer to all of the others, it could happen at any time. we might not find out, and it might be when we're finally through the request for proposal process, or it might be through the duration of the progression of that project and its delivery that we might find out that. So it will be through the life of until that project is on site being delivered, where the risk is much lower of us knowing what the cost is versus what we've received the grant funds for.
I'm just wondering about the impacts on the annual plan next year as we go into working our way through that. And I support the delegation that this is going to everyone that's on it, but to continue to have some oversight from all of us over what might be deferred, reprioritised, and the additional capex that might be required. It's probably a finance question, I suppose. But there is a delegation as to who's going to be on the decision-making committee. Can the rest of the councillors be kept briefed on the projects that may be deferred or the additional capex required?
Yeah, we probably wouldn't know that until quite late in the piece, whether there is a requirement for anything to be deferred. Ideally, we'll make selections around projects that have the least risk and therefore the least chance that we'd have to defer anything else, because we've built in a risk assessment before we've made the decision. But in terms of keeping councillors in touch, absolutely. Thank you for that. Councillor Linda Cooper.
Sorry, it was actually questions about the impact on our next annual plan, so I think that's been answered.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kathy Casey.
Thanks, Fiona. At this stage for the EOI, how much detail can you give me about the projects themselves, in particular the two transport projects, the one in Mount Eden for the station and the Carrington Road Unitec? Is that public transport, roads, footpaths or cycleways?
I'm loath to get into too much detail because it's changing at the moment with assessments against criteria. I can say with Mount Eden that I believe it's the connecting community projects that they're putting forward.
Can you just speak up a little bit?
Sorry, I believe with Mount Eden that it's the connecting community projects that they're putting forward for that programme, but it's still being defined, and there's a lot of assessment that needs to occur to make sure that the projects that are put forward are compliant. So it would be remiss of me to commit today to the details of the programmes.
Any more about Unitec Carrington transport project?
So I believe that's Carrington Road upgrade.
Okay. And when will we be getting the detail? Will that come at the EOI stage more than we've got today?
So yes, the EOI applications will have the detail in there. So I guess we can come back once we've got the approvals for the submissions and give a summary of what occurred and what projects were put forward.
Okay.
You're welcome.
If I can just ask, almost supplementary to that, with the delegation to the group that determines the final list, that will include the ability, once we've done that extra work, which is going to happen very quickly, to reduce that list if need be. Okay, I think that's quite important. That may not be the final list. We'll get officials to go through that, and if the risks are higher or the returns are less in regard to some of them, we may narrow that list down again. Okay, online, Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore. You there, Bill?
Yeah, I am. Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Fiona. And I think Jacques here as well. I see on the little screen. I appreciate this work. My concerns, like everyone else, are concerned about the risks here. Fiona, is there any stipulation about whether we have to have P90 or P50 would suffice for the actual application? That's the first question. The second one, along a similar sort of lines, is around the percentage of contingency given the infrastructure cost escalations that we're currently experiencing and can expect to continue. So is there any parameters put around those 2 points from the Crown's process?
Through the Chair, not in the EOI application. I think the risk is on us and how we propose and present that information. As I said, a lot could change between the EOI application on the August the 18th, and the opportunity in October and towards the end of the year with the request for proposals. A number of these areas we will have a lot more detailed information through the Supporting Growth Alliance, in particular around the ATAP works, etc. So we will be in a better position to mitigate some of that risk. I'm not sure I can answer any more. That's enough.
Thank you. Bill, any further questions?
Yeah, no, Mr Mayor, I think a fair bit of uncertainty around this yet.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Shane Henderson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. A theme emerging around the questions of risk. I'm wondering if you could talk me through in a bit greater detail around the risk to parks and community facilities investment assumptions.
If we're bringing forward housing sooner than we expected, then we will be bringing forward the need for the likes of parks and community facilities. So the application requirements asks us to determine how many years further forward we are bringing in enabling this infrastructure. We have involved Cynthia's team. We will be able to give high-level assumptions around that, hopefully, before we submit the EOI application. At the moment, I can't answer your question because they're still going through what that might look like, and we're still gathering information. It could be a few neighbourhood parks. It could be a large regional regional sports facility. It could be community facilities. How large that is yet to be determined.
Thank you. And the last question I have is in the name of Member Tau Hinare.
Kia ora, Mr Mayor. Look, was there any, during the process, was there any thought given to sort of trying to work out an implementation plan between the Crown and the council whānau about the longer term opportunities for Māori to get into this space? You know, in terms of expressions of interest, I mean, I know I look at the impact statement, Māori impact statement, it's in that area. On a number of occasions over the last few years, I've talked about getting Māori into the space of infrastructure, whether it be housing or infrastructure. Was there any thought given to the opportunity that this creates about having some sort of long-term plan look at getting Māori into the space?
Through the chair, the commitment from Crown is the separate 350 million for the Māori development, and the EOI criteria around involving Māori land and Māori land developers. It would make your application stronger if you were doing that. With regards to longer term commitment to do you mean the forming of the funds, or do you mean recipient?
I understood that as creating opportunities for Māori to be involved in the actual infrastructure provision, so getting involved. Yeah. The simple answer is no. These things come from Crown with incredible deadlines, and you have to get it in. That does not mean that that's not something we need to look at. But in terms of this specific process, no, the rules are set by Crown, and there we are.
I suppose it raises the opportunity that if we were better prepared, we may have been able to push the Crown on a few other things as well. Having said that, is there an opportunity now to investigate how we actually do that? I mean, who knows in 12 months, 24 months' time, under this government, under a future government, that we would be ready to go with some innovative program.
There certainly is, and maybe we actually need to officially say that we do that and look at what can be done in that space. Not something that will happen overnight, but yeah, most certainly.
Then IMSB will approach you at a later date, and we'll see if we can get something together.
Yeah, thanks, Toe. Look, I don't know, but I imagine that government would have been in discussion with Maori entities separately from us to give more notice for this, because I appreciate that we've got 2 weeks to get this in now, and we've got all the staff that we have that are able to work on that. Maori entities less so, but I imagine that the government has had a separate stream of conversation directly with those entities because they're able to make applications in their own right. Right, I have now a late edition question. Councillor Richard Hills.
Kia ora, Chair. I did put up my hand up before, but I think it was missed, so sorry about that. Just to, maybe to Member Henare's question, do we know the quantum of the 350 million that would go to Auckland for Māori housing providers, or we're not told that level of detail?
Through the Chair, I believe Crown are still working through the criteria as to how they apply that 350 million, similarly with the Housing Acceleration Fund for the large-scale projects.
Okay. I have 2 more questions. One's a bit of a cheeky one. What if we just said, could we put this all on the Eastern Busway, the last stage, and just get that move forward? Could we do something like that, or is that technically not going to enable the housing?
Through the Chair, that question has been asked. It needs to significantly bring forward housing and be a programme of work, so it needs to be more than one project. It has to be a programme, so it wouldn't meet the criteria on its own.
Okay. Even if we attached it to the MPSUD around walkable catchments, suddenly, no, we couldn't.
It still needs to be more than one project that enables or brings forward more housing in that area by December 2029.
And my last question is, and thank you for that, how will it be weighted? So there's, my personal view would be, City Rail Link, Mount Eden Station development in Carrington, because they are intensified climate-focused projects, but obviously that's written in here, but how is it weighted? Is it going to be weighted with things that are actually underway? We've got some of these things which will enable maybe a plan change to be started. How will we know what will happen from here? How will it be weighted that, yep, something just needs this one tweak or this one transport item and then we can go ahead? Or are we going to be trying to enable things that aren't even sort of underway yet? I'm sort of thinking about 2 years from now rather than 8 years from now sort of housing development.
Councillor Hills, if you look at the criteria in attachment A, what we tried to do there was to be able to give you like a complete comprehensive package, which will include, for example, if it seems like community facilities is going to have to be brought forward. But also it looks at where are you going to get the most delivery of houses the quickest. If you still have to go and do plan changes and all kinds of stuff, it's unlikely that houses are going to be delivered in vast quantities within 8 years. So that will all be part of the council assessment to try and give the group that will look at this a good overall feeling for what this means in total, both in terms of value for money, but also the consequences of additional capex, all of that. So that list there is not a list of expressions of interest. That is purely a list where we're asking you for us to focus on those areas to do all of this work. Like the Mayor said, that list might be really short in the end because there's only so much money, there's so much of the criteria requires a lot of detail, and in the end it is about, will this package bring housing forward? That's underlying what this is about. So I think partly the assessment that we've put together from the council point of view will give you a lot of that, and then the group will be able to look at those and compare them and weigh them against each other, and which one actually gives us the best value for money and has the least risk. That's probably the...
Yep, that's exactly what I would have answered. It will be based on which of those programs are most likely to succeed to attract government money, which are the most important according to the criteria we've got set out in sections 26 and 32, and then that last element that a lot of people have talked about is which are the least risk to ourselves. So you may be right in what you assessed in terms of CRL, Carrington, etc., but we need to work through that process to find out. Okay, I've got another question now in the name of Councillor Sharon Stewart.
Thank you. I just want to thank Councillor Richard Hills for reminding everybody about the Eastern Busway. One of the things, just on housing and the Eastern Busway, just where the Pekaringa Plaza is, the plaza is actually waiting for something to happen, and they can go 12 stories high, and that would all be housing, and there'd be shops and development down below, and then we've got, so really to complete what we're trying to do with the Eastern Busway, the Reeves Road would make really good sense. And at the moment, we've got a Pekaringa Plaza, which is almost becoming a ghost town. All the shops are just moving out, and it's really, really sad to see. And we've got, in our area, we've got a couple of ghost towns. We've got Highland Park shops that have become a ghost town, and they could also go up. So could we try and put something like that in there? Could you see what you could do? Because really, that would be a lot of houses that could, that could be built at the plaza, and it's ticking all the boxes. Thank you.
Councillor Stewart, I absolutely get where you're coming from, and we can have a quick look at that. However, based on the criteria and what that would be, the EOI be based on, we will have to prove that that 12-storey building can't proceed because of infrastructure restraints. Now, if that is the case, we can have maybe a bit of a look at that, but I suspect that's going to be hard to show, that it is particular infrastructure that prevents that from being developed.
Well, okay, all right. Well, I wouldn't mind, perhaps, maybe we could meet out at the plaza and you can actually see firsthand and you'll get a good understanding. Thank you.
Thank you. There are probably a lot of other bids that could be put in, but the truth is that we'll be looking at narrowing the list, not widening it, I imagine, and it will be on the criteria that Jacques answered before. Thank you for that, Councillor. I'll now ask staff to leave the table, and the floor is open for any comments. Every comment you make stands between you and lunch, but don't let that discourage you.
Can you just note that as Deputy Chair now that Chris is conflicted?
Okay, I'm he who hesitates is lost. I'm not. Bugger. I'm looking at this side of the room. I don't see any indication of interest. Yes, Councillor Henderson.
Thanks, Mayor. Look, I just wanted to endorse your approach around narrowing the list rather than widening it in line with the parks and community facilities risks that we identified. That was all. Let's go ahead.
Yeah. I just think, look, it's been pretty clearly explained. One, you never look a gift horse in the mouth. So yes, we want to see if we can get additional capital investment in the city. So therefore, we've got to predict what's in the government's mind as to what is the greatest priority for them. We then have to look at what is most important for us. And whether it can fulfil that criteria, and then we've got to look at risk, and that's what the delegated group will be trying to do. And can I just draw your attention to, there's an amendment on C, that it's the Deputy Chair of the Planning Committee that would be involved in this group, not the Chair. So hopefully that answers, Councillor Richard Hills.
Thank you, Chair. And I just had a quick comment too. I hope that we do put equal weight on the criteria around climate and sustainability. I also have concerns sometimes that even on the same paper, we might make decisions that contradict one another. So I would be concerned that we jump to grab funding that actually pushes us in the opposite direction of the MPS UD, because of course, building houses on a large green field can be a lot easier, but actually the outcomes for climate and accessibility and congestion and everything else, access to jobs and education, could have the opposite effect. And I think 200 or 300 million, which is probably we can assume would be where we're heading. I'd love to get half or more, but I'd be concerned that we spread the load too much and actually don't get the outcomes we want. So yeah, that's what I hope. I'm sure it'll be looked at quite closely, but I would hope we're not just trying to push some quick sprawl type development out there, because we know that is having a lot of pain out there at the moment. Thank you.
Thanks. I think that's a positive comment. I think that's why the projects I suggested might be at the top of our list would be there. That brings us to the vote on the motion. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. I declare that carried, and we might invite Councillor Darby to resume the chair. Can I just get maybe while he's coming in, the next item I think was to do with the marina strategy. Did you want to tackle that before lunch or after lunch? Okay, I think the votes are in favour of after rather than for informally. So I don't know what's happened to the chair, but
We'll just adjourn for lunch.
I'm just going to presume the power that I have to adjourn for lunch, and if we can be back by 1:55, please. We've still got a lot of items on the agenda.